Thank you, Monsignor Minnerath, for this enlightening and deep presentation. Now we have 15 minutes for discussion, so I must ask you to make very synthetic questions. Please, yes, please, Marcelo.
Congratulations, Monsignor. I want to ask a question to come back the question of yesterday in some sense. According to Hegel, in the philosophy of the history, say that with the Christianity, with the message of Christ, we have for the first time in the history the clear division of two kingdoms, the kingdom of heaven, that the responsibility of this is for the church, and the kingdom of the different kingdoms of the earth. So you speak about this. This is for you, this observation of Hegel is just because for the other religions we don't have this. In the Roman Empire, the emperor was the sacerdote. So this, I think this is a very important distinction.
Just a word. Before Hegel, I think Luther also stressed very much the distinction belonging to the kingdom of heaven, so the invisible kingdom of heaven, and belonging to the earthly organization of the church, which he gave up to the temporal ruler. But it is true that universality through faith has emerged with Christianity. In antique times, there was no city, no state, no empire, which was not consolidated by its own religion. Now religion is something of a personal choice. You belong through faith to a community. Either you are from anywhere, from any social condition, for any cultural background. And this universality has merged into the organization of the church. It is true that along the centuries, mainly in the East, the churches tended to become national churches. We have that in the Orthodox world today. And this is not appreciated, not even by Orthodoxy itself, because their theologians say the church must be the church, even if it is rooted in a particular people. And I think that the Catholic Church has maintained this dimension of universality very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Monsignor Minnerath. I think that also the answers should be as short as possible. I have two requests by Jean and Vittorio. Anybody else? Carrozza. So you have to be very, very synthetic. Please, Jean.
Yes, thank you for an excellent expose and analysis. And one can note that the Holy See and the Order of Malta are the two states based on functional representation left on the globe. But of course, in old times, before the territorial state, it was we, in a way, who developed representation and much of this thinking. I wanted to just make a remark and ask for your comment on the following. When one goes to East Central Europe today, people are very interested in their own history. They are very knowledgeable about history. They have a clear and traditional sense of nationhood. They are not postmodern. When you go to Western Europe, there is no sense of history, no interest, no education in history, very little. And there is no concept of nation and therefore no concept of citizenship. So this is what we see in Europe is a division along these lines, and it is sort of very obvious when we discuss immigration. We had a paper here by Weigel, the lawyer, Joseph Weiler, last year, who spoke about this social contract, how immigrants are not asked to become citizens in Europe, whereas that's the case in the United States. And I think here is the key to much of the problematic in Europe today. It's not nationalism in the old way of being belligerent against other nations. It is much more a big question mark about political community, which is more than just rights. It's also duties.
I would say, in a word, that most nations in the East.
Minnerath,
Yes.
I would like to collect the 4 questions because we have to stay in. So the second question is by Vittorio, please.
Thank you so much, Archbishop, for having shown us the Catholic commitment to universalism as a basic feature rooted in the nature of a universal religion as Christianity was conceived from the beginning. My question is only a minor point. You certainly rightly insist on the artificial nature of states, but is people not at least as artificial as nation? Because after all, there is no clear definition of what constitutes a people. For example, the linguistic criterion. Every linguist who is competent cannot really answer the question, what is the difference between a dialect and a language? Is Sardic an own language? Is Sicilian an own language? There is no sharp definition of that. The degree of being genetically related is obviously a continuum. There is no sharp demarcation when we can say it ends. And as you yourself said, the common history is often a result of constructions, as we have seen in the 19th century historiography. So the point I want to make is also ethnic groups are to a large amount artificial constructs.
Vittorio, now Paolo Carrozza, please.
Thank you for the wonderful paper that helps us so much. 2 quick questions. One is, when you begin to introduce the teaching of John Paul II, you acknowledge the way that in some senses he rescued the concept of nation and the rights of nations in what is implicitly in your narrative a positive sense. And then you conclude with a categorical rejection of nationalism. So I'm wondering where, in your view, but in the teaching of the Church, what distinguishes the positive love of and affection of one's nation and the way that that contributes to human flourishing, and that negative part which then we would reject. Well, where do we do? The second quick question is this. It seems to me that at least implicitly in our discussions and narrative, both historically and conceptually, the main alternative to the idea of nation is empire. And the main alternative to nationalism is imperialism, so with the negative connotations of that too. And this is an idea that's been explored recently by the Israeli political philosopher Yoram Hazony, I think quite interestingly. And I wonder if you would say that the Church's sort of medieval political construct of empire as the primary political expression of Christian universalism has now been replaced or needs to be replaced by the model of subsidiarity and a federation perhaps, or an association of nations of some form, and therefore we need to reject empire and imperialism equally alongside nation and nationalism.
Thank you, Paolo. And now Rocco, the last one.
Well, I will spend a few words in favor of 2 concepts. The first one is the concept of duty. We have a culture of rights, and it seems that we all have rights, and the state has the duty of concretizing our rights. This means the state must be omnipotent, because in order to give reality to all rights, you must have all powers. That's the problem of the modern state. So should we speak more of duties, intermediate communities, and nations as one fundamental intermediate community? The second observation regards the idea of empire. I like it. There are many different formulations of the idea of empire, of course, but I think now John Paul II probably had in his mind the idea of the Rzeczpospolita Polska. The Rzeczpospolita was a family of nations. that the Polish men, the Lithuanians, the Ukrainians, who put together their sovereignty, exercise their sovereignty together, because each one of them alone cannot give to the citizens the goods of citizenship, external security, internal security, possibility of economic development, and possibility of the flourishing of one's culture. The fundamental right of nations is to culture, and sovereignty is in function of the possibility of living one's own culture. So should we stress more this Catholic idea of nations that put together their sovereignty?
Thank you, Rocco. Monsignor Minnerath.
Thank you.
No more than 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, for, the question of the feeling of nation in Eastern, Central and Eastern Europe, most of these nations have consolidated themselves against former empires. It was the Russian Empire, then the Soviet Empire, then the German domination, and I think they have a feeling that they survived through their culture, and this was the thesis of John Paul II. He said, Poland had no state during more than a century, but was able to reset a state because it was kept alive through its culture. And this feeling is stronger in the east or the center of Europe than in the west. I think we all agree of that. Well, I jump to the next question. I think, Professor Hörsli, that wherever you have a state, it is a result of a will. While a people, it is here. You have a people, you do not decide that you are a people. You belong to a people exists. It is a connection of human, it is a human group with its own identities, etc. So when I say a state is artificial, in the sense that is artifact, it is made by the will of human people. All our states and state borders are the result of conquest, of treaties, and not given by nature. The nature is something else. Okay. Then Professor Carrozza, yes, the difference between nationalism and patriotism in the feeling of John Paul II is very important. I think it's very easy to grasp from his teachings that nationalism is the way to reject the other, to have a bad message about the others, not to accept fully the brilliant history of the other. While nationalism concentrates on the own deeds of your own nation and probably also in a way which is exaggerated. While patriotism is a peaceful, serene feeling of belonging to a history, to a territory, to whatever comes. It is the extension of the love which is due to a family, and this is patria, and this is a very deep-rooted feeling everywhere in the world. While nationalism, piracy is a very bad negative feeling. Now, the empire or nation, I think the distinction is not having a national state or a multinational state. There is also the possibility of a state which is a shared sovereignty state, freely shared sovereignty, and this would be the project of Europe. And I think the example you gave of the Lithuanian Polish Commonwealth on the Jagiellonian time was an experience of a universal shared sovereignty. Okay.
So much. I think there will be time in the afternoon session to continue the discussion. Now we have a presentation on the state of the world by Professor Hans Joachim Schellenhuber, who is the academician of the other academy, the Academy of Sciences, and we know he is a very famous expert on climate issues, and he has accepted to contribute to this meeting in the spirit of a collaboration between the two academies. So we are very grateful to you for coming. You have the floor, please.